As Greg mentioned, I am from Battle Creek. Battle Creek is in the middle of the map, and this is a picture of the Kalamazoo River watershed. I grew up in Battle Creek, spent all my life there, farm community. And then when I finished high school, I went to college in Kalamazoo, which is just downstream. Hang on, I'll point here, because I know that it's smaller. And then the smaller picture is a picture of Michigan. In Michigan, we like to hold up our hand because the state is shaped like a mitten. And I live here. And obviously, the Kalamazoo River connects to Lake Michigan. It's a major tributary. Just some quick facts about the watershed. There's around 2,000 square miles that drain into Lake Michigan, and it's home to 400,000 watershed residents across 19 cities, 11 villages, and 107 townships. This is a picture of downtown Battle Creek. This is where we would come and take a lot of prom photos, just because in the spring there's a lot of blooming flowers. It's just very scenic. This is a picture of the river. Wanted to show this photo because it shows how large the river gets in some areas. Like the caption says, the river is home to a lot of hiking, boating, fishing, hunting. It's mostly used for recreational purposes. Recreation and tourism in the summers are huge for this river. There are a lot of canoe levees, and it's used quite often, especially by the residents that dot along the river. This is a photo of Mill Pond, which is by Battle Creek. It has a lot of river walks that go around it, and so a lot of families use it. These are more photos of Mill Pond, and I wanted to show these photos of birds because the river is a landing spot for migratory birds, and especially heron. In the September, October months, there's a huge migrational of heron, blue heron, and just 20 miles east of where the spill has occurred, which I'll talk about in a minute, you can go and view hundreds of blue heron that are traveling down. It's very beautiful, but obviously they come to this part of Michigan as well. We've invested a lot of money into this river. Just downstream from where I grew up, towards Kalamazoo area, we do have a problem with paper mills, and there are pollution issues, PCBs to be particular, and we've gone through a lot of legal suits and just hurdles to get to a point where we feel like we can invest money into the river, clean it up. This is a picture of a sturgeon that has come in from Lake Michigan to the river, and that was a huge, huge step in the right direction, and it shows the investment is working. Now, getting into the dirty stuff, July 15th, 2010, at a congressional, thank you. July 15, 2010, at a congressional committee hearing regarding safety violations, Enbridge was asked to come and speak in front of a congressional body to talk about their violations. Enbridge officials testified that the company was able to detect a leak almost instantaneously after it occurred, and they were talking about how most of the pipelines have a lot of issues on them. This pipeline, which is part of the Lakehead system that Aaron was just speaking about, has 329 defects. Fixed prior to the spill were only 61. I'm going to now go over a timeline of the day that the spill occurred. On July 25th, 2010, at 5:56 p.m., officials from Enbridge, Control Center effected shutdown of the Lakehead Pipeline 6B. This was a previously scheduled routine upkeep shutdown. At 5:58, officials received warnings that there was a loss of pressure in the line. Later that evening, the first of what would become very, very, very many numerous phone calls describing a smell of natural gas in the area by residents. City of Marshall firefighters were dispatched to try to locate the smell and source. Let's skip ahead because they kind of repeat. They reported seeing or smelling the odor, but there was no location determined. There's a nearby oil storage tank facility. They thought perhaps there was something wrong with that, but again, there's a lot of confusion as to where the smell was coming from, and even more reports continued to come into the night. July 26, 2010. At 12:30 a.m., very early in the morning, Dirk Durham received his first call of the situation's public health department. Officials at Alberta Control Room attempt to restart the Lakehead Pipeline 6B. The system will not start. Technicians spent nearly the next 4 hours troubleshooting the problem. Officials at the control call a mass balance analysis to assist with the startup. Officials increase the pressure of the line as well as turn the line off and on repeatedly. The line was officially shut down around 7:52 a.m. at the Marshall station. They sealed off sections of the pipe. And then at 9:49, Alberta control officials dispatched an Enbridge employee to the area to try and figure out if something had occurred. He reported not seeing anything. At 11:11 a.m., our local utility, Consumers Energy, came to the scene because, again, 911 calls were coming in, a lot of 911 calls, and there were reports that the whole city of Marshall had filled with gas. It's the smell of gas, and 11:16, I'm sorry, Consumers Energy discovered the oil, and they reported it to Enbridge Energy Partners. A couple more hours pass, and the reports indicated, and they reported it to the National Response Center. And this is 18 hours after alarms indicated that there was an issue. This is a photo of the pipeline and the burst. I apologize, it's a little dark, but you can kind of see a cone, and so it gives a scale of how big it was. Good, it's showing up. Okay, so there's 850,000 gallons to 1 million gallons. I've even heard numbers of over 1 million gallons. It varies depending on the source, but a safe estimate is between these numbers. The pipeline burst, saturating a 5-acre area that is next to Talmadge Creek. The 5-acre area got so heavily saturated with oil that it spilled into the creek, which then ran into Kalamazoo River, coating over 30 miles of river and shoreline. I'll also note that the river was at a flood state because days prior we had 4 to 6 inches of rain in the area. Both the creek and the river were overflown. So a lot of residents came across this sign, including myself. The day that I heard of the spill, I had heard it on our NPR, National Broadcasting Radio, and we came across this sign, and in the same stop, I'll show a photo later of animals that we came across, and we tried to report those animals to the number, and a lot of residents refer to this sign, and this is how they learned of the spill. I'm now going to show a video of some residents that we spoke with shortly after we were trying to engage the people in the area to try to see how they were understanding the situation, if they needed help. So here's a video.
That?
Yeah, well, I grew up on the Kalamazoo River, about maybe a half mile upstream from here, off of South Shore Drive. Moved in here, I was 8 years old. I used to swim in this river. We were on a well, and at one time our well broke down, so I actually bathed in this river, okay? I've canoed every inch of it, and I know this river real well, so seeing this, I think the saddest part for me is what mankind has done to all the critters that live. They're the ones that are going to pay the price. I mean, mankind, we make a bunch of mistakes and, you know, we pay our price, but you can't do anything for all the turtles and the muskrats and the fish, and how long is it going to be, you know, before that comes back. And, you know, the thing that kind of spooked me a little bit is I never even knew that there was an oil pipeline that came through this area. That was news to me. So, I mean, how many other little hidden things do we have? This is a really sad day for me, especially since I lived here. Very sad day.
I'll note that in the video you see all the people on the bridge, and that's when my coworkers and myself went to go investigate what was going on. That's a lot of what we came across, is, you know, residents flocking to the river just trying to understand, you know, how bad it was, where it was going. So it was pretty hard to talk to a lot of people in the first few days because there was a lot of confusion. These are some aerial shots of the river, and the photo on the left is one that I took in our first visit. A lot of residents had questions about whether they were safe. There were heavy amounts of benzene in the area. Benzene is a gas that is given off when crude oil starts to break down, once it enters natural environment like a river. And this benzene can be considered in long-term doses, to be a carcinogen, cancer-causing, and the health department defined long-term to a resident as being 2 weeks. And so this gas was very frustrating the first couple days because it was so strong, and in the first couple days it was very important in our eyes for the emergency responders for Enbridge to get out to the community and tell them what was going on, and that just was not happening. So a lot of residents in the crucial moments were left in their homes to breathe the air, to drink the water without having any communication whatsoever. A lot of residents also wondered who is in charge, who's responsible for this. And so I'll quickly go over the unified command. This is set up in the emergency response. In the first couple days, Enbridge is required to give a response plan to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and the EPA rejected that first response plan, or the cleanup plan. Then in the second week, they submitted another cleanup plan, emergency response plan, and that was accepted. But in that time, they developed the unified command. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was overseeing Enbridge's cleanup efforts. Enbridge was in charge of cleaning up. They were in charge of wildlife response and recovery, and they were also in charge for helping people cope with health issues. And so that didn't sit well with a lot of folks, and it didn't necessarily sit well with me, especially because I'm from the area and I was hearing a lot of what people were going through. And so I want to note that you know, it was really hard for our area to have this come through, the devastation, just destroy a lot of people's homes, a lot of natural resources and wildlife, and then the party at fault was then in charge of, you know, giving answers to everybody. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife is helping with recovery of wildlife, along with a contractor that that Enbridge has hired, which is called Focus Wildlife. And then the Michigan Department of Natural Resources is going to oversee the cleanup after the EPA has approved it. And in September of, I think September 27th, the EPA did approve Enbridge's cleanup to that point, and so then it was shifted over to the state for the state to oversee. So this is a news article I came across. Enbridge's oil spill response borders on overkill. President Obama was briefed in the spill. This was a few days after the spill, and he promised swift response and resources. Jennifer Granholm, which is the governor of our state of Michigan, did a helicopter tour of the damaged area, and she was very frustrated with what she saw and the response of the cleanup. She felt the oil had progressed a lot further than what was being reported. Tuesday, Enbridge company leaders said the response efforts were immediate and bordered on overkill. Governor Granholm says that that's not the case. I disagree with that characterization. From my perspective, the response was anemic. And the state of emergency was issued. And with a state of emergency, we were able to pull in a lot of state resources and a lot of federal resources to help contain the oil in the river and to help bring in equipment for the cleanup. Some aerial shots. That's Ceresco Dam at the top left. And Ceresco Dam is where a lot of oil pooled. And there, as you can see, there's a small village in this area, and a lot of residents were really impacted by the pooling oil. And again, days before there was any kind of real emergency response where people were evacuated, and sometimes it wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary. So I'll show the progression of the oil. The leak site on the left-hand side here, there was a 5-acre area that was heavily saturated. That saturation, again, went into Talmadge Creek and traveled the length of the river to Morrow Lake. And it was contained at Morrow Lake, and then where you see the red stopping, there's a dam there. They did draw down a lake that's further down because they were worried that the oil was continuing to progress. And with that drawdown, they exposed mussels and fish, and so there were some wildlife impacts there as well. Just again, the progression of oil. This is, I believe, just before Battle Creek. Also note, this is a farming community, and the river was completely shut off for recreation, withdrawal, no contact order. That no contact order remains today, and it will remain into next year. They're not exactly sure when it will be lifted. My educated guess, based on what has happened thus far, is it'll be into the next year and possibly the following. And agricultural land, again, they withdraw the water, and so that source was gone. They were told they could not obviously withdraw water to put on the crops. Sorry, the oil is not showing up in that photo very well. This is the gentleman that owns this property. I mentioned that some residents were given a mandatory evacuation. He was one of those, and then I know a couple others, but a majority of people were given a voluntary evacuation. And then anybody that was on well water was banned, or there was a water ban in general. That has since been lifted. It was just lifted last month. I believe 30 to 40 homes were the count for the homes that were officially displaced. This is the first community meeting that the communities had. I took this photo because everybody was very tense and frustrated. They came and they gave a speech. They talked about what happened. The EPA talked about what was going to happen, and frustration rose when questions and answers were not taken. So I wanted to show some photos of workers because I think it's important to note that workers are an important piece of this. A lot of the workers that were brought in are contractors, and they're not Enbridge employees. There are some, but not all. And there were major worker safety issues, health issues, rights issues. I want to skip ahead and show this while I'm talking about it. So this is a photo that was taken, is very popular because it shows the lack of safety that workers were enduring. They don't have masks on. I mentioned the smell of the benzene, which was still an issue weeks, months into the cleanup effort, and they're being exposed to it in very large amounts. Again, this worker, very, very, very little safety. just very frustrating situations. Okay, go back up. So this is the pipeline that burst. I apologize, the picture has become grainy when it enlarged, but the pipeline restarted. In order to restart the line, there had to be a few conditions. Enbridge had to address a couple spots along the line that were also considered bigger issues. They did that, and then another obstacle is to have a third party looking over their restart, and that third party is still looking over their activities on this pipeline, and that was effective this last week when they had to shut down the same line because of defects further down. I believe there were 6 defects in total that they had to dig up and evaluate. This just came out today, so I apologize as I stumble through it. The Natural Resource Defense Council, NRDC, has released a report, and in short, the report is outlining how intense tar sands oil is, and it says that tar sands has the potential to, or it has 15 to 20 times higher acid concentrations, and so they believe that it weakens the pipelines. And the oil that was in this pipeline was considered tar sands oil. Moving on to wildlife, I'll quickly note that, again, a lot of the shoreline in the Kalamazoo River was heavily saturated with oil, and in our area, Erin has mentioned in the past in her presentation that around 75% of wildlife depends on wetlands in one way, shape, or form. And so to have that be the most impacted area of our river was adding insult to injury. This, again, was the muskrat that we came across. When we found him, we tried to call the number that was on the sign that I showed you earlier. That woman that answered that phone number directed me to an 800 number that Enbridge had set up. That 800 number went unanswered. This was a couple days after the spill. And then with these two, we called in to the 1-800 number. This was a few days later, and we did get through, but we were informed that they would respond on an as-need basis. And this hotline was set up by Enbridge. It was manned by Enbridge. It was the number you called when you wanted to report wildlife. It was the number you called when you wanted to report a health issue. And so any concerns you had as a resident went through that hotline. These are photos of the response, the Annabelle Response and Recovery Center. In the first week, we were invited to come view the facility that they were developing, and we were very frustrated by the lack of use. We only saw one goose and a couple reptiles, mostly turtles, and you see the woman in the left-hand corner. She does have a Canadian geese, or Canada geese, I'm very sorry, Canada geese in her hand, and she's getting ready to feed it in front of us. And we were also disturbed that everything was so white. We knew that there just was not enough use in that facility for it to be up and running for a solid week. And then down in the corner here, this is what it looked like a week after that. So 2 weeks into the spill, that's what it looked like. That's up and running. That's how it should look. We would have liked it to be a little bigger, a little bit more response perhaps, but you know, things were rolling in the right direction. And then they in that same visit, they cleaned their first bird for us. And that, again, was 2 weeks after the spill. Because of the delay in response to wildlife, a lot of residents wanted to take matters into their own hands. This was a impromptu cleaning of, I believe it's a muskrat, and we have a lot of rehab groups in the area, but unfortunately not very many of them are equipped to deal with oiled wildlife. And so there's a liability and a concern on the part of the EPA and Enbridge to have residents handling oiled wildlife. And so those operations were shut down just as quickly as they started. This was very frustrating to people. They really wanted to help, and they saw that they needed to help, and they saw that response was not quick, was not adequate. And so, you know, it just builds and builds and builds. And We even had in our office people calling us. I work in Ann Arbor. I do not work in Battle Creek. It's about 30 minutes, 40 minutes east of Battle Creek, and we had people calling our office telling us that they were finding wildlife because they were desperate just to contact anybody. On the left is a turtle that we were able to help recover. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services allowed us on a mission to recover wildlife, and the buckets you see are a lot of wildlife that, there are a lot of turtles that were recovered in that effort of that day. And then, again, I'm sorry for the grainy photo. This is a photo that was taken of a heron that was eventually recovered and rehabbed and released. This was a photo my mom took, actually. I called her up about a month and a half ago, and I asked her, just to take a couple of photos. It was becoming fall. I wanted to see how things were going. And this was one that she took. I was pretty appalled. This is their attempt to keep wildlife out of this area that is obviously very saturated. It's a plastic owl on a stick. They were using some cannons in the area, but not many. And obviously those only work at the time of use and not any other time. Current status of the river. So like I said earlier, the EPA has said that the river is clean to their standards. They have given Enbridge the okay to finish cleanup for the for the winter months. They left a couple boom in, I believe, until last week, and then they pulled the boom out of the water for the winter months because of freezing. They initially said that they would like to have every single drop cleaned out of the river. They promised that they were going to get every single drop cleaned out of the river. And then later on, as they moved forward with the cleanup, they discovered that going into a lot of the wetlands was going to be more intrusive, going in, ripping them out, then possibly leaving the oil to let biodegrade. That practice is still being questioned by a lot of residents. A lot of residents feel like it may have extended too much into the bottom of the river, into the sides of the river. And there's been a lot of pushback in the last couple months on that decision. And the last couple of weeks, maybe it was 4 weeks ago, the EPA officially said that there is still some work that needs to be done, and so in the spring, they're going to come back and redredge parts of the river and try to get a lot of the oil that is still trapped in the sediment. And they do admit that there are parts of the river that are, they will come back in the spring, and the wetlands that they originally thought they would leave, and they're going to try to clean those up. Just some quick stats on the cleanup. They said, this is from Enbridge's website, total recovered oil to date was 757,000 gallons. I'll note that there's a lot of waste from this. They used a lot of absorbent boom. They used a lot of boom that had skirts on it that would catch the oil as it was going across the boom. The water would flow underneath the skirt. The oil would be diverted to an area and they would suck up the oil, but the boom can't continue to be reused. They used a lot of absorbent pads, a lot of skimming, and that's why you see the oil and water mixture recovered so high. A lot of that is water. And most of it is water. This is just kind of a fun story. So we, in our mission to go just talk to residents that we knew lived along the river just to see how their communications were being met, we stumbled across this gentleman who owns a solar business, and he lives on parts of the river, and he let us walk back with him to his property, which is beyond the woodlot that you see in the background, so it's not something that he sees all the time, but if you take a nice path back, he does have a lot of riverfront. He had not been back to see because nobody had come to talk to him about his property being affected. His property was right before where the oil was said to be contained, and so he thought no, not much had made it there. We walked back there with him for the first time when he saw the oil, and just a shot of his barn. He was putting up, or he was digging a trench for his solar panels. It's kind of cool to watch, but so this is the lane back to the river, and where I'm standing and where I took that photo, there was substantial flooding into the wetland, and all of it is water oil mixture. And he bent down. He thought, this has to be mud, and we smelled the oil, and we knew it was in the area. And you can see in the distance in the trees that are dipping down in the water. A good foot of the trees are covered in oil, so you know there was oil there. But he went to wipe that off, and it was very obvious that much of his property had been saturated with oil. And with that, I'll take questions. Let me quickly, I want to make sure I made some side notes earlier. Yep, got them all. Okay. Any questions?